reality, and our main question for today is, what is magic? Our second question will be, where should you begin? Let me start by giving you two definitions of magic that I'll be making use of throughout this entire video. First, in paganism, magic refers to the ritualization of one's spiritual intentions. It is often spelled with a K after the usage of Aleister Crowley, the 20th century esoterist who wished to differentiate his practice from stage magic. Today, the alternate spelling separates the spiritual practice from the fictional magic of fantasy novels and films. Magic is not about cultivating spiritual powers, but rather about aligning oneself with natural forces to manifest an intention. In paganism, ritual techniques that change a person's consciousness so that he or she may better perceive and participate in divine reality are regarded as magic. And for a second but shorter definition, I'm going to turn to Crowley. Magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with the will. He also included ordinary acts that were involved in producing one's true will. In this definition of magic, it's not necessarily the supernatural nature of the act, but its alignment with a person's true will that makes it magical. Magic also takes advantage of certain concepts within quantum mechanics, mainly the idea that intention creates reality. It has been proven that on the quantum level, paying attention to something can cause reality to shift. This shifting has been proven to occur simply due to the fact that a human being chose to observe an event in a particular way from a particular point of view. Otherwise, it can be shown that another event would have occurred. If human observation can affect reality, and human observation is ultimately attached to the mind, then the mind is fully capable of affecting reality on this incredibly dramatic level. Now let me respond to the idea that magic is a bunch of nonsense and a waste of time. Let me counter this skepticism with an example from the CIA. Since the 60s, the CIA has performed a number of experiments in an attempt to discover whether or not people are capable of doing what we can call magical or miraculous acts. I'm now going to quote to you from a document that I've linked down below. I'm not going to quote directly from one page. I'm going to jump around to make a point, and then, like I said, you can read for yourself if you'd like. The following was written by a Dr. Kenneth Kress. The author was involved with many aspects of the last such investigations. This paper summarizes selected highlights of the experiences of the author and others. The intent is not historical completeness. Files are available for those interested in details. Instead, the intent is to record some certainly interesting and possibly useful data and opinions. This record is likely to be of benefit to those who will be required to evaluate intelligence-related aspects of parapsychology. The agency took the initiative by sponsoring serious parapsychological research, but circumstances, biases, and fear of ridicule prevented CIA from completing a scientific investigation of parapsychology and its relevance to national security. So let me pause here. I would like to point out that this document is published by the CIA. It's something that has their seal on it. They just put a little disclaimer saying that it's not their official opinion. Anyhow, the document opens by showing us that they did study things that they refer to as parapsychology, and that they were stopped from fully researching them and being certain of what the ultimate outcome is. Now, one of the key questions becomes, well, what did they actually research and study? Well, they didn't study everything they could have. Quote, attention is confined to psychokinetics and remote viewing. Psychokinetics is the purported ability of a person to interact with a machine or other object by unexplained means. Remote viewing is akin to clairvoyance in that a person claims to sense information about a site or person. Again, let me interrupt here and say now we know what they studied. They studied psychokinetics and clairvoyance. Now, what exactly did they do to study either of those things? Well, in all cases, they took people, either willingly or unwillingly, and they had them perform various remote viewing experiments. So let's focus on Pat Price. He was a remote viewing expert, so to say, and he was asked to do the following things. During the summer of 1973, SRI continued working informally with an OSI officer on a remote viewing experiment which eventually stimulated more CIA-sponsored investigations of parapsychology. The target was a vacation property in the eastern United States. The experiment began with the passing of nothing more than the geographic coordinates of the vacation property to the SRI physicists, who in turn passed them to the two subjects, one of whom was Pat Price. No maps were permitted, and the subjects were asked to give an immediate response of what they remotely viewed at these coordinates. The subjects came back with descriptions which were apparent misses. They both talked about a military-like facility. Nevertheless, a striking correlation of the two independent descriptions was noted. The correlation caused the OSI officer to drive to the site and investigate in more detail. To the surprise of the OSI officer, he soon discovered a sensitive government installation a few miles from the vacation property. This discovery led to a request to have Price provide additional information concerning the interior workings of this particular site. All the data produced by the two subjects was reviewed in CIA and the agency concerned. The evaluation was as usual mixed. Pat Price, who had no military or intelligence background, provided a list of project titles associated with current and past activities, including one of extreme sensitivity. Also, the code name of the site was provided. Other information concerning the physical layout of the site was accurate. Some information, such as the name of the people working at the site, was incorrect. Now, this document I'm quoting from does include other experiments, but I hope I've just made you interested enough to read it. Now let me get to the real meat, the conclusion of this, which is fundamentally interesting and significant to us as people looking to practice magic. If the above is true, how is it that the phenomena remains controversial and receives so little government support? Why is it that the proper assessment was never made? This state of affairs occurs because of the elementary understanding of parapsychology and because of the peculiarities of the intelligence and military organizations which have attempted the assessments. There is no fundamental understanding of the mechanisms of paranormal functioning, and the reproducibility remains poor. The research and experiments have successfully demonstrated abilities but have not explained them nor made them reproducible. And it is at this point, ladies and gentlemen, that we find ourselves. We are looking to change that last part. We are looking to make these effects that they said were proven to be supernatural in the lab but unreproducible. We're looking to make them reproducible. So how exactly do we go about doing that at all? Well, at this point, I guess I'm speaking to those who have yet to begin their spiritual journey, or having begun it, have no idea where to go now. This is something that you might want to consider when you're looking into how to practice magic within your life. The first thing that you need to consider is, just like there are many different types of philosophies and religions, there are many different types of magic, and they're not necessarily all compatible. But first, let me talk about why you should be bothering to do this at all. Is it because you're hoping to fly around the room, read minds, or do something equally impressive? Or is it just a very fancy and over-the-top way of going on a journey of self-discovery? The answer to both of those questions is a little bit of yes and a little bit of no. At a certain point, a person doesn't choose to engage with the mystical or with the divine because they're hoping that their life will remain as mundane and boring as it was before they began doing that. Most people are hoping that in some meaningful way their life will become different, and beyond that, I would argue that most people who begin getting into magic want their life to become different in a particularly mystical way. But does that actually ever happen, or is it a bunch of charlatans just saying, yes, I can see the future? Well, as the study that I quoted earlier shows, even the government has been able to prove that people have supernatural abilities. They're just not able to necessarily pull them off on command. Now you might be saying, well, what are they actually telling us by declaring that? Well, what they're saying is that they have been able to run experiments in which they've been able to prove that there's no other explanation for what the person did other than a supernatural one. They just can't get the person to keep doing that thing. So to answer the first question completely, yes, it is possible to apparently develop supernatural abilities when practicing what is called magic or parapsychology. They're effectively the same thing. One is just the term you would use if you want to call yourself a scientist and not a magician. Now, on the second part of the question, is it just a really fancy way of going on a journey of self-discovery? Yes, it is. It is part of going on a journey of self-discovery, but that's not all it's about. It's also about changing the world around you after you're done finding out who you are and changing yourself. I would like to take a moment here and make it clear that this definition of magic that I'm giving and this purpose of magic that I'm giving are a particularly Western and sort of developed sense of the idea. By developed, I don't mean that in an insulting way. I mean that it's a highly philosophical system. It's incredibly thought out, and not everybody's magic is like that. This difference in magical practice is usually called high magic versus low magic. I tend to call it complicated magic versus uncomplicated magic, because at the end of the day, most of these people are trying to do similar things. They're just going about it in a different way. So at this point, we should begin asking ourselves, what are some of these different ways? Well, today I'm going to begin with Hermeticism, and then in the continuation of this series, I'll go into other magical traditions so that you can make up your mind about which to try. If you are wondering what's the difference between a magical tradition and the societies I spoke about last time, various magical and secret societies will practice various magical traditions, but the traditions and the societies are not one and the same. For example, the OTO is not the only organization that does something with the idea of the Lima. So let's move on to what exactly is Hermeticism, because you probably heard this term thrown around, or you've heard the word hermetic mentioned if you studied magic, but what exactly is that? By definition, Hermeticism is a philosophical and religious system that is supposed to be based on the teachings and writings of a god or being known as Hermes Trismegistus. And that's a syncretic god. It's a mixture of Hermes and Thoth. A majority of the teachings within Hermeticism come from something called the Hermeticum, which is a collection of the books and works that are considered essentials to anyone studying the subject. Speaking of what is essential in Hermeticism, what is fundamentally essential is the experience and revelation of divine love. According to Hermetics, divine love reveals ultimately that the apparent multiplicity of the universe is really unity. Now, of course, being a classical system, it does divide the world into 4 elements: fire, water, earth, and air. But, as Hermes states within the book, the world is one, the soul is one, God is one. This paradox is not something that the normal mind can unravel. Instead, the unraveling takes place as an experience, a realization that there is no mystery or ultimate truth to unravel, but you've rather known the truth the entire time and just had to accept it. According to this point of view, the experience is not at all like acquiring facts from a book or lecture. The knowledge really comes from within. By that I mean you come to understand that there's no real within and without. This point of view can be attained by, again quoting Hermes in the book, by having godlike concentration on consciousness. It comes like a rushing river tumbling in flux from above to the depths beneath. In the worldview of Hermeticism, the universe is seen as hierarchical, with God or the supreme being be the ultimate first cause. Ultimately, everything is linked back to God in a series of chains, yet he's not connected to the chain, but simply controls it and controls all of it through, again, divine love. In the Hermetic system, the cosmos itself makes up the second god. From these 2 beings come celestial gods, followed by demons and their attendant spirits. From the gods and demons, continual influences are born throughout the world, and from this point they say that the character and state of every body is determined by these influences. Continuing on with Hermetic cosmology, one of the things that we can notice is that the manifest, moving, and perishable is governed by the unmanifest, unmoving, and imperishable. Which brings us to a fundamental Hermetic idea, which is that what is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above. A fancier way of saying that is that the microcosmos mirrors the macrocosmos and vice versa, that what is fundamentally true on a large scale ends up being true on a smaller one as well. The fundamental forces that are at play on our spiritual journey within Hermeticism are the consciousness of God and our own personal consciousness. One thing that practitioners of Hermeticism are trying to do is access divine consciousness because it gives human beings enormous power. This is because, from the point of view of Hermes, man is a great miracle, a being to be adored and honored. He passes into the nature of God as though he were God. Praise in most elements of Hermeticism is key to transformation, transformation being a discourse between the divine and human consciousness. This leads us to the roles of man according to Hermeticism. According to Hermeticism, the first role of man is to contemplate and revere God. The second role is to care for creation. Hermeticism works well for those who ultimately have an idea of a divine judge and punishment in the afterlife because, according to Hermes within Plato, when the soul is departed from the body, it will come under the power of a most potent spirit who will examine its merits and judge it. When that spirit has discerned that the soul is pious and just, he permits it to remain in the region which it merits. But if he sees it is covered with the stains of crime and oblivious to its vices, he hurls it from the heights to the depths, delivering it to the storms and whirlwinds, to the ever-contending elements of air, fire, and water, so that it is caught between heaven and earth, continually buffeted in different directions by the turbulence of the world. This is because if humans do not choose to come under the finer laws voluntarily, they come under the laws pertaining to matter, which are governed by the 3 ineluctable forces: destiny, necessity, and order. Therefore, it is the goal of Hermeticism to rid human beings of the bonds to these 3 forces by having them follow divine laws. However, in order for these laws to have beneficial effects on the soul, they must be followed voluntarily. If you have to ask what the divine laws are, they're really not that complicated. It's basically being a charitable and decent human being and remembering to give reverence to the divine. Here, however, is a prophecy actually that comes from Hermes, and it's somewhat poignant to the time that we find ourselves in. The gods will withdraw from earth to heaven. Duties to the gods and divine worship will be prohibited with penalties. This holy land will be filled with sepulchres and the dead. Only stories of your religion will survive, and these your children will not believe. Egypt will become a desert, an example of the most ferocious cruelty. The fruits of the earth will wither, and the land will no longer be fertile. The very air will hang heavy in lifeless torpor. Such shall be the old age of the world, irreligion, disorder, and unreason concerning all that is good. Obviously, that sounds rather bad, so what is a hermetic or a person who practices Hermeticism supposed to do in order to counter this, improve themselves, and improve the world? According to a book called The Emerald Tablet of Hermes, there are 3 parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. Those are alchemy, astrology, and theurgy. I'll explain astrology first because it probably requires the least explanation. Astrology is the study of the movement of the stars as they relate to the fate of human beings. Another term for astrology in this system is the operation of the stars. Moving on, alchemy is referred to as the operation of the sun. The point of alchemy within the Hermetic system is to investigate the spiritual constitution of life, matter, and the universe. The various stages of alchemy were seen to represent stages of spiritual enlightenment. The ultimate goal of alchemical practice was the completion of the great work, the turning of a human being into a godlike creature. Finally, theurgy, or the operation of the gods, is separated into 2 different types of magic. One, the divine magic, relies on an alliance between divine spirits, angels, archangels, and gods, and the practitioner, whereas the other magical practice, referred to as goetia, involves enslaving and interacting with demonic-like entities. The goal of both practices is not exactly the same. The goetic practice is meant to control negative parts of the human, and the divine practice is meant to elevate the human being to a higher plane of existence, so to say. Hermeticism does believe in reincarnation. Hermes Trismegistus is quoted as saying, "O sun, how many bodies have we passed through, how many bands of demons, how many series of repetitions and cycles of the stars before we hasten to the one alone." Hermeticism also includes the idea of the fall of man. Quote, in the book Isis, the prophetess to her son Horus, God, having created the universe, then created the divisions, the worlds, and various gods and goddesses, whom he appointed to certain parts of the universe. He then took a mysterious transparent substance, out of which he created human souls. He appointed the souls to the astral region, which was just above the physical region. He then assigned the souls to create life on earth. He handed over some of his creative substance to the souls and commanded them to contribute to his creation. The souls then used the substance to create the various animals and forms of physical life. Soon after, the souls began to overstep their boundaries. They succumbed to pride and desire to be equal to the highest gods. God was displeased and called upon Hermes to create physical bodies that would imprison the souls as punishment for them. Hermes created human bodies on earth, and God then told the souls of their punishment. God decreed that suffering would await them in the physical world, but he promised them that if their actions on earth were worthy of their divine origin, their condition would improve and they would eventually return to the heavenly world. If they did not improve, he would condemn them to repeated reincarnation upon earth. So there you have it. They would practice both what was called high and low magic, or as they referred to it, theurgy and goetia. And if that's something that you'd like to actually begin working on, there are several works that I've linked down below that you can try reading and both carrying out the rituals within. Before you go and pick any of them up, I should discuss the various tools that you're going to need before you begin on this journey, specifically the tools that most magical rituals require you to have in order to carry them out. There's a few that are basically essential to, I would say, 95% of them. There are 7 tools that I consider to be particularly useful. They are the wand, the dagger, the cup, the pentacle, the incense, a bell, and some candles. All of these items play direct roles in ritual, either from setting the mood or actually being implements that you're supposed to pick up and use at particular times. Today I'll begin by describing the first 4, and then in a later lesson I'll tell you how to incorporate the other 3 if you're not really sure how you would do that as of yet. So let's start with the dagger. The dagger in magical work is obviously the one that gets a lot of attention during CSI shows, but it's mainly used to divide concepts and is symbolic of the intellect. But what exactly does any of that mean, even if you've heard it before? What it means is the dagger is used in part of the rituals where you are trying to categorize and order the little universe that you're working in while you're performing a magical ritual. It represents the reasonable and discerning part of you and is therefore part of the ritual in which you discern what parts you want to take with you and what parts you want to remove. It being made of metal is supposed to be symbolic of cold logic on some levels. It is rarely in the modern age used as a tool of sacrifice, and I myself don't know anybody who does use it for that purpose. The next thing you'll need in order to practice this is a wand, which, yes, is very much what it sounds like. It's a stick or a metal device that's basically that long and functions in the exact same way that you would imagine it would within a fantasy setting. However, the point of the object is very different. It is meant to symbolize a person's will and creative potential and passion, and is meant to direct that particular force within the ritual itself. This is done by simply moving it about and pointing it at objects or in a direction that is important or necessary for the ritual's completion. Again, some of you you might be finding these descriptions a little bit simplistic, but this video is geared towards people who may never have heard this before. Moving on, the next tool is the cup or chalice, which is symbolic of water and the emotional state and conscious mind. This item is also used in parts of ritual that have to do with communion or giving some sort of offering to a spirit. Finally, you'll need something that looks like this. It's a pentagram, and you basically need it either the size of a large coin, or you can get it in sort of small plate size. You're going to use it for various reasons. Some of them might have to do with taking offerings from your altar to the outside, or it's simply used as a medallion to represent elemental earth. Again, that's not all it's used for, but that's a really good starting point considering I'm hitting you with a lot of concepts already if you haven't really thought of this before. The way in which you'll use these items is usually well described within a magical ritual, and the point of using them is again to act as an extension of yourself and to give you something to focus on. Now you might be asking, why do I need anything to focus on? And the argument is this: in the West, it is a lot harder for us to get out of our bodies and to differentiate ourselves from our emotions and everything else. The point of magical and religious ritual, therefore, in this Western system is to give us something to focus on so that we can forget about our bodies and actually get out of ourselves and experience this religious or ecstatic experience. That's not the goal of every single religious ritual or every single magical ritual, but that's the goal of the big ones. With all of that being said, I'd like to share with you 2 rituals that I make use of that you might find practical and that give you a taste of what I happen to teach and believe, so here we go. For these, it would be nice if you had all of the implements that I mentioned earlier. You don't need to necessarily buy them from a shop, but you are also welcome to find 4 objects that represent what I said they represented, and they don't necessarily have to be the 4 that I mentioned. I mean, so long as they represent those concepts and elements to you, they will work. You'll find a PDF linked below that has both of these rituals within them. If you have any questions or comments about them, please leave them connected to this video or send them to me directly if you would like. The first ritual is for those who would like to formally begin their spiritual journey, or another way of looking at it is formally mark the beginning or most significant part of their spiritual journey, the point at which they decide to become serious, you could say. It's a great ritual to perform on your own, especially if you've always wanted to have some sort of initiation ceremony but have never been drawn to an official group. The second one, quite simply, is for anxiety and is a useful way for you to get used to the idea of religious practice. Well, until next Saturday, I hope I've given you some good information and ideas that you can look into. Until then, as I've mentioned in other videos but didn't point out here, meditation is a key part of developing your magical practice, as one of the key parts of magic is developing your ability to concentrate for a long amount of time, not just on, let's say, one thing, but also on, let's say, nothing for a moment. One of the reasons for being able to achieve this empty mind space is this is sort of how the communication between you and God can work sometimes. Sometimes by emptying your mind, there's a way for you to hear the greater voice within the universe. My next episode will actually talk about how you can combine meditative and magical practices together to achieve best results and actually have some sort of religious or spiritual experience in the long run. If there is anything that I covered within this episode that you feel I didn't go into enough detail on, or if there's just a question that I never got to, please feel free to leave it in the comments below so that I can help you during the week. Also, if you have any suggestions for topics, please begin to leave them. There's already 2 that I've made note of, and I'm already working on a Knights Templar episode and an episode on the women within occult orders. There's a few other suggestions that have been out there, and I'm also making note of them and working on episodes to get you that information. But that's everything that I have to say for today. I hope I've done a good job of answering what magic is, even if I haven't yet answered the question fully, because as I pointed out in the beginning, it is not a short answer if you actually want to cover all of the traditions and philosophy that the Earth has. So I'll see you all next week as we explore further into what magic is, with a particular focus on the blending of meditation and magic and how that can benefit your spiritual practice. I'll also be covering the Thelemic perspective to magic to oppose it to the Hermetic approach, and you can see how they don't incorporate the idea of sin and a fall of man. This is because, as they say in Thelema, there is no grace, there is no guilt, there is no sin, there is no salvation. Instead, it's an entirely different focus when you're on the spiritual journey. But to learn more about that, you're going to have to tune in again next week. Thank you so very much for watching. This has been Emiliano Noriega Petty, your host with Past, Present, and Occult. I hope you all have a great day.